Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got with me Chris Feeney. Chris Feeney is a sales engineer working with the IGEL channels. Chris, how's it going?
It is going well. Thank you, sir. How about you?
Good. So I think I've been communicating with you guys. We got the podcast out on Apple's podcasting system, and so it automatically starts playing when I turn my phone on or put my earbuds in. And so twice in the last 24 hours, I just started listening to us, and I literally found myself listening to us, and I already know this stuff. I've already had this conversation, but I thought it was interesting that just my own natural instinct was to listen to this podcast and rehear what we'd already talked about. That was pretty awesome for me, really.
Yeah, I did the same thing prior to when it was on Apple, just, trying to get a sense of that. You never realize, what you sound like or whatever, but it's great. I like how we're doing it, and it's always great to have Seb on as well. Seb, how you doing, man?
Quite fine, but I must admit that hearing my own voice is still a little bit surprising. I must say, it sounds weird to me. And I have to slow down my English sometimes. So I will try to speak a little bit slower, and I will just keep a gin tonic every time before joining your session, just to be sure that I'm speaking slowly enough.
Tricks of the trade, man.
So Seb, I actually listen at like 1.25 or 1.5 normal speeds. So man, you're flying.
Yeah, I was doing that to kind of get through them as well. And so, yeah, if you could slow your English down with a couple gin and tonics before you join, that'd be awesome.
I will, I promise.
Well, between your speaking quickly in English and Chris and I, especially I, speaking slower Southern English, it's quite the dynamic.
Yeah. Somewhere in the middle we'll meet. Awesome.
Well, so guys, we have a topic for today. So this is our every other week where we do a blog from the IGEL community. And this week, Chris went out and found one that he wants to review, and I agree, and Seb agrees. It's the title of it is How to Prepare IGEL OS for Work from Home, and then allow end users to self-register via the ICG, which means IGEL Cloud Gateway. And it was written by Lars, and Seb, I'm going to let you pronounce the last name, Glockner?
Glockner, right.
Okay, who's a senior solutions architect, EMEA at IGEL. So Chris, why this one? What did you find interesting about this particular blog that made you pick it?
So it's interesting. So, we're coming up on a year of when, everything began to get locked down. And, for me at that time, I was migrating away from federal and was working with an account where they were buying a lot of UD pockets. And one of the things that, we began running into was the registration effort, how to get these folks registered. And is there a simpler way versus the wizard, that you normally would go through, fill in some details? And honestly wasn't sure, but I think since that time in the last year, we've added a feature in the product where you can push ICG configuration out from UMS. But there was also these other methods, scripted methods, or what we have here, a similar thing where you could kind of pre-fill the configuration to make it easier to get the user, to get the device, I should say, registered, registered, and then a reboot, and then everything comes up and you're now connected to the gateway. So, I think highlighting some of these things, because, it really comes down to a deployment situation. And what's really cool is I also found that this process would work if you wanted to migrate somebody out of one system into another. You could, run this, and it basically registers the device, where you could clear out the ICG config, register it, and then reboot it, and then it comes up and registers with the new one and sort of, migrates over. So there's multiple use cases here with something like this. So
Chris, maybe it would help if you and Seb just kind of walk us through what the use case looks like without any of the pre-populated piece. What is it? Well, maybe start by just telling us about UMS and ICG and those two components and what they do for the system overall.
Sure. Seb, you want to take a crack? Or?
Sure, I would just introduce maybe just a little bit of the functionality of the configuration wizard itself, because until the moment where we propagated this ICG minus config tool, we had the only way to register a device outside of your company with your cloud gateway is to start a specific wizard where you can enter an URL and a multiple or one-time password. That was pretty handy if you want to do it in the former years, if you wanted to register one device. But sometimes you have more than one and you are not able to deliver that configuration with that to every user. So it was, let's say, pretty complicated. And just coming back to what the ICG is, so if you have a device outside of your company network, so a device which is in a teleworker situation, somewhere behind a DSL modem or whatever, this device generally not seen by the UMS. I mean, it's functional, you can still use it, but you're not able to start remote shadowing, so remote support session if the user is having an issue by connecting to a Citrix environment, like an example. That's where the ICG comes in. Or you want to push out a new configuration to your UD Pocket, to your device converted with the USC. That's typically something that you cannot achieve without having an ICG server, at least not actively, and that's where the ICG fits perfectly in the second way. Third way, which is also meant for helping customers, helping users, is to see his actual state. So just giving back asset information about the device where the UD Pocket were connected and booted from. So that's basically all that the ICG is doing. It connects your outside device with the internal UMS without being a VPN. So just to set a proper expectation for those of you who never heard about ICG or maybe heard of it but didn't know what it is, the ICG is only meant for IGEL configuration and IGEL remote shadowing support. It's not meant to replace a NetScaler or whatever VPN solution that you might have in your company. And that's where we are talking today. So just my short introduction about the product itself.
Yeah, it's a great, and the way it's licensed, we'll talk a little bit about that. So IGEL has basically two licenses, more or less. The Workspace Edition, which has a lot of the functionality. Today it's perpetual, so it's under maintenance, and then if the maintenance expires, everything kind of basically still works. But then there's this piece, the subscription piece called the Enterprise Management Pack, and that's where this functionality for IGEL Cloud Gateway resides. So assuming the device has both of those licenses, you will be able to register and use the ICG Agent Wizard if you want to go through the wizard process. And it's not that difficult, I mean, there's, if you're using a public certificate, right? I mean, then there's a piece of this registration that the user won't have to worry about, and that's what's called the fingerprint, because it's got a trusted root CA and all that stuff. And so the user just needs a URL. Where do I go? They could even use their email address if they wanted to register. That's another option. And then, generally speaking, a password or a structure tag, and that kind of puts them into a particular directory where then all of a sudden the magic happens. Their device is registered. It gets configuration changes and stuff. And some of the challenges there is, all right, I've got a UD Pocket. I'm going to ship it to somebody. Completely unconfigured. You've got to give them some details on what to do. So there's this registration process. But let's assume you had somebody that was mostly working in the office, and all of a sudden they had to go home, or they were going on vacation or whatever, and hadn't really had a chance to set up ICG connection. You could assign, based on today's law, you could assign this profile to them with a shortcut on the desktop that would automatically allow them to basically self-register. And that would be all that would need to just register and then reboot the device, and they're good to go. So it just sort of simplifies that process and removes maybe end user error potential, right, if they type in something wrong. So
that makes sense. Process to begin with. However, if it's work from home, we want things to be as simple as possible for end users to get onboarded.
Yeah, I think that's really. I mean, the process, like, isn't that terrible? But if it's a way to just you take a couple steps out of the way, and with a short double click, done. A little message pops up and says we need to reboot, and then it reboots. It's very nice, and so. Again, and it also gives you some flexibility. I think one of the nice things about the IGEL ICG agent is that you could, again, as I mentioned earlier, you could be connected into your demo environment, and you want to completely migrate out of that and register it with a production environment. You could run this this script, for example, and have it, clear out whatever ICG config you had, replace it with a new reboot, and then it comes up and registers, and then then you get the new configuration. So that is something that would also work. But we can kind of dig into the details as for how this all happens behind the scenes. The blog post kind of talks you through step by step. Seb, did you have any other comments, I guess, about
the comment itself, or you mean about the registration process of ICG?
The latter, the registration process.
The registration process, no, we already covered it perfectly. The only thing I would maybe add is the human piece. So what Chris already mentioned is this kind of human error source that you might have as a user. You are not able to manage that kind of device anymore if the device is already set somewhere in the home office. So if the customer is using, let's say, the wrong URL for connecting to the ICG, or typing in 10 times the wrong password, that's usually something that you cannot find out without asking questions, without having a long talk to the end user. And that's where the script fits perfectly, because you don't need that anymore. It's let's say, a great addition to the feature we introduced in 606 to send the configuration outside to the device. And it's not, in my opinion, really a huge security impact, because everything that we are speaking about into the script is already stored in a profile. But yeah, let's talk about the script itself. It would make sense maybe to switch to that section. Because we want me to take over the comment itself, or would you like to take over?
Yeah, why don't you go start with step 1, and then I'll pick up around step 2.
Perfect. So on IGEL OS, you might already have the situation where you have used a custom partition, or an application which is not, let's say, configurable through a profile under session under accessories. I mean, especially creating a custom application. The custom application means that you're creating a custom partition, just to be clear. You're just creating a shortcut to something. So speaking about that one, we are creating a shortcut to a binary, which is for Windows users something which is comparable to an executable file, so an exe file in the Linux operating system. So if you create that application, you will need, even if it's not mandatory, an icon name. The icon name is something that you might find already in the registry of your profile, but it's not needed. And then the command. And the command is meant to be entered as a Linux command that you would start in the command line interface. So just keep in mind that the command that you enter there is executed in a specific context, which is in that case in a user context, and can be combined with some parameters, which are then in the second part of the command line, where you can add parameters related to that binary file. And if you are interested in getting more insights about how to use that command, which kind of commands do we already have in IGEL OS integrated, just be aware that there is a GitHub page, the IGEL community GitHub, where you can find every kind of, or not every, but most of the commands we have in our operating system. And then you can be used in a custom application field.
That's a good point. Yeah, that, like I said, if you haven't, for those listening, if you're not familiar with it, go to archives.igelcommunity.com. There's a wealth of information there, including the reference to sort of these Linux commands, particular to IGEL, that you could use. It's a nice little cheat sheet, and I think there's even a GitHub site that you can go to and see, and they keep it maintained there. So, definitely kind of, go there and try some of these things out, get a sense of what's going on behind the scenes with these commands, and as you mentioned earlier, which ones require user versus root, to properly execute. So.
And in most cases, you cannot break your device. I mean, there are a couple of comments where you might break something, but it will not be gone forever, right? So if you take over that command in a command line and you have a direct physical access to the device, the last line of resort would be to refresh the device with an OSC, so with the OS installer. But honestly, you wouldn't go that far, I guess. So just in case, You can test a lot of things inside of a virtual machine also with IGEL OS, but yeah, that's maybe something we will cover in an upcoming podcast.
Sure, sounds like a good one.
Yeah, I think the idea of helping people understand how maybe with Oracle VirtualBox or VMware Workstation or others, but primarily those two, how you could test and play with the IGEL solution. Definitely as a consultant, found a lot of value in the early days of being able to do that and wipe it out and do it again. Definitely for situations like this where you're testing a script of some type.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
So guys, what else in the world of remote working with IGEL could we kind of take this conversation and dovetail into? What other challenges did IGEL run into when work from home happened in such a big way? Was the solution we talked about last time? Was the solution just happened to be, where it needed to be when all this broke out, or was there any key elements of the story that IGEL had to evolve quickly?
I guess, Chris, if you're permit that I go first, I would say the firmware update stuff is one of the hugest topic we had to deal with in the year 2020. I don't have a real statistic how many private builds and release candidates we published last year, but it was huge because of new Citrix Workspace app version, new VMware Horizon clients, new client components in general, like Amazon or whatever. And delivering that kind of update to the endpoint, to UD Pocket somewhere over the world was pretty tough, I must say. And I must admit that until now, we don't have a, let's say, an up and running solution where we can say, dear customer, if you want to install ICG, go that route, because every customer is different, every user is different, every country is different regarding bandwidth and DSL or internet connectivity. Yeah. So that's, I would say, from my opinion, speaking about firmware update, that's something where we had to deal with a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So I'll kind of add to that. I think just looking back over the last year, you had customers that necessarily had IGEL. All the pieces were there. There wasn't a technical, like we don't have a technical solution for this. We actually had stuff. It was really just making sure you had it up and running in the right way and properly set up for that matter, so that devices could be sent home or registered for the first time and be managed. And then that brings up, all right, now that we've got that squared away and they can work, we got to update it because we got new stuff coming out. We're going hot and heavy on Teams and or Zoom or whatever. And all of a sudden now we got to update the unified comms pieces with Citrix or this or whatever that. And so, getting through that initial hurdle, which obviously starts by getting the device under management. And so it was either what's the easiest way to get them to register, pre-configured, or manually, sneaker net before you send it home, or something like this, where you could, or just put this on when you get home, just run that little shortcut. So all these things kind of help us through that. And then of course, by the end of the year, we had, available in Azure an ICG. From the marketplace. You just click on, here's an Ubuntu box, comes up, and all you got to do is bring it up, and then now you've got, it's already pre-spec'd, just install ICG. So very quick ways for folks to kind of consume and have those products up and running. Obviously, in between there, we had Seb put out a great series on hardening the ICG. I think it was an Ubuntu box you picked. So we've got a lot of information there for folks, but it's become sort of that norm. But I think, that getting those devices under management and also making sure they're updated. And so what did that force customers to do? Where am I going to put my repository? Where am I going to put my firmware that can be accessed anywhere on the internet? And so, I think that's really the key thing here. So, looking at this blog, we kind of get through the step on, creating the custom application with an icon on the desktop for the user, and there's a command behind it. But what I like about this is it talks about some of the features that maybe don't get a lot of attention, and that's these environment variables, which are in the firmware customization. And I know when I was covering federal, I touched on them a little bit. Sometimes it was her VMware situation. Sometimes it was a smart card middleware variable that I was using. I didn't use them a ton, but it's very handy. And in this case, the particular variables that it's calling out are, there's a ICG address, fingerprint, if needed. That might be unique. If it's a public CA, you don't necessarily need to fill all that out. But if it's a private cert, you would need to provide the entire fingerprint there, so the user doesn't have to worry about that. And then there's also, a key variable, the one-time pass key, right? Obviously, you need some kind of password to be able to register in. And I guess you could probably add another one there if you wanted to do like a default directory rule or some kind of structure tag or something there if you wanted them. I don't see that here, but it would not be very difficult to add that variable to this script if you wanted to do that. So, but it's all there. It doesn't require anything other than filling those details in the profile, and then assigning it like everything, assign it to the device, and voila. So pretty straightforward. The proof is in the pudding. Certainly try it out if you haven't seen it. It was just recently posted. I think it was just about a week ago. So.
Hey guys, I sent a future topic of just custom partitions in general for one of these community blogs where we can talk about pushing it through ICG and also custom partitions in general. We'll talk through that. I'm sure many of the listeners know all about custom partitions, and many of them see it as a black box that they don't, and that'll give Seb and Chris an opportunity to dig into those a little deeper and explain them.
Yeah, I like to invite my buddy Ron on. He's been awesome at contributing to that the custom partitions piece on the community and the GitHub site, and has done some pretty amazing stuff with, here's how to package it up following the IGEL standards, but then here's this little script you can run, and it builds it all in like a minute or less, depending on the size of the app you're trying to do. So we can roll our sleeves up and get into some custom partition stuff there.
And that's a good topic real quick, is if people have topics they want us to cover, right? I mean, please let us know somehow. Seb, I know you're tied in with community. Chris, you are too. And if there's areas where people want more insight in a podcast, then we're open to it. Just let us know.
Yeah, no doubt. Happy to do it. But I think, just kind of going back to this, I guess just a way to simplify the user experience at the end of the day. You could also use this, I think, if you wanted to kind of have a team that pre-configures devices before they go out, have them register, get this immediately assigned, and then click on it, and then bam, they're good to go. So there's multiple ways to kind of handle this onboarding piece. I think if I'm highlighting them, the initial registration, you could use it to migrate a device from one system to the next. And then, of course, this self-service component, so that the user can do it at their own accord. So
I would just maybe add one or two sentences regarding this Zenity, part of the comment that Lars created. We don't have so much possibilities to interact between a command line command and the graphical user interface. So basically, if you start an application without having some kind of Zenity or a YAT, it will, mostly speaking, just run through and doesn't give any kind of feedback back to the graphical user interface, so back to the user. And this Zenity command, which was added by Lars into the custom application, gives exactly the text that you are seeing. So in that case, I can't remember what it was. It was a device was registered to the IGEL Cloud Gateway, ICG, and will be started now. So that's basically something that you can just let it popping up by using the Zenity or YAT command. And even if it's not part of the topic today, just be aware that Zenity or YAT can also be used to create forms where if you are, let's say, skilled enough to create a script and create some content you want to gather from the user, or maybe putting some comments behind that graphic user interface window, you could also easily enter text there. So speaking about what Chris just mentioned regarding the structure tag, we could before putting up this warning that the device was registered, also adding a free to enter form where the user could enter, let's say, his name or maybe his location, his country, and based on that feedback, then going to default directory rule on the UMS side and saying, okay, now we will deploy the device into the right, let's say, country folder if you didn't create it in prior. It was one thing. The second thing I wanted to share on, or to discuss at least, on the script itself is the ICG-config is not, let's say, it was not available anywhere. So if we speak about that script, especially like Lars did it, I would definitely recommend to use one of the latest IGEL OS versions, because I can't remember, Chris, it was 11.02 or 11.03. We had a couple of major releases where the ICG-config tool was gone and came back then. So just in case, I mean, even if I'm pretty sure that all of our listeners are already using an actual UMS, an actual ICG version, and IGEL OS version. Just in case, if it's not there, just open a local terminal, test the command, and check if you are on the latest IGEL OS version.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do remember seeing that when I was looking at and testing a similar script. It was like, hey, your minimum version needs to be 11 something or other because it was missing. And sure enough, I had one of those devices at a particular firmware. Looked, I was like, you're right, it's gone. So I don't know if, let's see, did Lars call out the specific minimum version? Doesn't say, but let's assume 11.3 latest or 11.4, you should be fine. So, and now 11.5. Gosh, we keep coming out with new versions, don't we?
And the nice thing about the IGEL world, unlike Windows or something else, a version doesn't mean a massive overhaul, right? It just means additional features, additional fixes.
Yeah.
Not 40 million lines of code.
Yeah.
Maybe just 30.
Just 30 million. Yeah. Ones and zeros got to happen, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
They all have to match at some point, right? So, awesome. Well, certainly for the folks listening, if you've got ideas or would love us to dive into maybe a little bit more detail on a particular topic that's out there, or being a community member, you've got an idea you want to blog about, you might find it being talked about here, and we might even invite you here as a guest to talk through it. So any of those ideas out there, right? You think the community will benefit from it, we're happy to go through it and talk through it. And the idea here, I think, is just, we all benefit when we share the knowledge, right? So
right.
Yeah, and this just gives people a different avenue to consume stuff that they could read, or sometimes they wouldn't read, and we just surface it to the top when they're on a train ride or walking the dog or something.
Yeah, I was just noticing there's just even more stuff on the community site that I don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. It's already there, so I'm going to start just pointing folks. It has a list of links and other resources that are already kind of mapped out for you. So. Anyways, but
yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate it. Anything else, Chris, in your world that you'd want people to know about before we wrap this one up?
I think as we kind of get close to the end of this month, actually this week, we should be releasing the new UD Pocket 2. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on one of those. I don't know if Seb, if you, as an insider, Mr. IGEL community guru.
I don't have it. I don't have it. I want it.
We're all waiting for it. So that'll be.
Is this the USB, the compact USB? What?
Yeah. So it's the second version has it's got it's dual USB. So you got USB-C and the USB-A. So you can flip it around. So basically more devices potentially. Most devices have a standard USB-A, but a lot of them will have a USB-C Max, for example. And so now you'll be able to have a UD Pocket 2, I should say, that you can plug into either one of those.
So Chris, regarding the pandemic and the speed of enhancements and improvements, you mentioned some on the last podcast, which I heard while I was listening to it the other day, is the speed at which IGEL adopted the latest Linux kernels And to me, you made that reference in regard to the UD Pocket. That's huge for UD Pocket because, there were devices that I would plug it into occasionally that would work funky. They wouldn't quite work right. But the UD Pocket and the speed at which the pandemic forced IGEL and other companies to adopt changes, including the updating and using the latest Linux kernel, that's massive for the UD Pocket, right? Yeah,
no, it's absolutely. And in fact, I had a partner last week that they had a newer HP device and maybe a Dell one as well, and they tried whatever version. They have a couple of UD Pockets on different versions. I can't remember which ones, and they didn't work. And so I said, all right, well, let me flash. I'll send you 3 new ones. I'll pick 11.3.4 and 11.5. And he tried the 11.5 one, which had the latest version of the kernel updates and stuff, and that one worked perfectly fine for him. So he got it set up, and he's all squared away. And so, and I think another part of this is the IGEL Ready program. That partnership with some of these vendors that have newer hardware, forcing the Linux kernel to be able to support it in a sense that is benefiting IGEL because we're working directly with these folks and making sure that we've got the mainline kernel updates that will be able to support newer chipsets and stuff. And so all that's going to benefit, especially when you have a little thumb drive that you can use to plug into some of that new stuff. So.
And you don't need any kind of adapters, because I'm not a big fan of adapters when it comes to any kind of data transfer, if it's related to display or to USB, and having a USB-C to USB-A adapter is something that I would try to avoid every time I can.
Yeah. The nice thing is it comes with a little fancy little cap, so don't lose your cap, right? Don't leave your cap on your when you close your laptop lid. Don't leave it there like I did one time and cracked my laptop screen. That was not good.
Oh.
Yeah.
Then I guess it was an Apple one, right?
No, that was a few years back. Let's just say, as a field SE, when you're out there and you rely on making sure your equipment works, I'm just grateful I really had a good IT department that got me a new device the next day. So,
I've never heard of someone doing that, but that's twice in the last week I've heard of someone doing that.
Yep. I was going to lunch and I said, let me just close my lid, crunch. I'm like, oh, crap. And it busted my my laptop screen because of that tiny little cap that I was using on that USB stick. So
you would have been better off losing the cap.
Yep. That thing probably cost like not even a penny. And but anyways, I got a new
that
screen.
Point, the adapters, the dongles. I got a whole bag of dongles I carry around now because I've got this new laptop, USB 2, little compact USB thing, whatever it is. And I got a whole bag full of adapters that make it harder to use my laptop, even though it's supposed to be, more convenient and smaller and better form factor. I'll be happy when everything adopts that new standard. And then, I don't know what comes next. Maybe a little pinhole type thing you plug in. But nonetheless, I bought a new laptop and now I'm struggling with all the adapters that come with it or have to go buy.
I think, yeah, I've got a box full of old stuff, KVMs, you name it, serial console cables from my Cisco days. I mean, I think those are still valuable, right?
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you for the time today, and I look forward to doing it again in a couple weeks with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
With pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.